but it raises the question, on what grounds statehood? So I'm almost done here, and I'm sorry to have asked you to listen so long. But I want to suggest to you simply this, that for Buber, at least the I only knows its world because there is a you who has consciousness of that world. The world is given to me because you are also there as one to whom it is given. The world is never given to me alone, but always apparently in your company. Without you, the world does not give itself. I am effectively worldless without you. Who's this you without whom I would be worldless? Well, the particular you, the human one that you are, is only part of the you to whom I am bound and upon whom my sense of world depends. Since in addition to you over there are a countless number of yous, and some link between all of you seems to exceed the particular yous that you are. How do we understand that, which links all the yous whom I address and by whom I am addressed? What is this relation? How does it relate to the living and exemplary relation among nations to which Buber referred in the 1920s? Is that a human relation or is it divine? Well, for Buber, it's a divine link to be sure, but this divine link does not bind together only those who already belong to the same religion or already share the same history. Rather, it links the I to those who happen to inhabit the same world and those for whom that world is also meant, that is to say, equally meant. We could say that the world is equally given to all humans, but Buber's point is that where there is no equality, where the world is not equally given to all humans, there is no world. And that is a point that is interestingly resonant with Arendt and her particular arguments about Eichmann, who thought he could choose with whom to inhabit the world, but in fact the world is given to everyone. We cannot choose. If we choose, yes, we cannot choose which population may inhabit the world. If we seek to choose which population may inhabit the world, we become genocidal. So this would mean that the Jewish God for Buber does not appear as a man or as one kind of people, isn't even represented by the Jewish people. It persists in the relations between nations that would include the Jewish people and all the non-Jewish peoples of the world. That's one reason why for him, if Zionism were to signify spiritual renewal or rebirth, it would have to take the political form of a binationalism, one that would affirm the equality of all people regardless of religion, even as it recognizes the cultural specificity of each people. For Buber, a Jewish ethic has to be Jewish and non-Jewish to be ethical at all. It implies living in proximity with others on a condition of equality and difference. If I cannot live in the world without you, according to Buber, then my life is bound up with yours, and we lose our world when we lose each other. That condition of reciprocal dependency is the very condition of renewing and repairing the world. Said noted in 1999, and I really am finishing now, I see no other way than to begin now to speak about sharing the land that has thrust us together. Okay, I'm quoting 1999. I see no other way than to begin now to speak about sharing the land that has thrust us together, sharing it in a truly democratic way with equal rights for each citizen. There can be no reconciliation unless both parties, two communities of suffering, resolve that existence is a secular fact. Well, they might have a dispute there, but that's okay. And that has to be dealt with as such. We can surely talk about what he means by secular in this instance, but I take it that it's a way of claiming that two populations, whatever their differences, are already there, bound together on a land that needs to be shared in equal ways and governed by democratic means. So how to get there? It's fair to say that Said was often the one to say that the sphere of culture has to be separated from the sphere of politics, that enjoys music, I think. He savored the paradoxical and unpredictable character of musical performance, and he understood these features of art to be quite different from political debate and negotiation. But perhaps politics is also a field in which unpredictable moments emerge, challenging us to sense and feel in new ways. For Said, certain forms of dialogue, even possibilities for friendship and musical collaboration, constituted those small acts, in Paul Gilroy's terms, that show that one person can offer an unanticipated form of acknowledgement to another, despite the political barriers and the structural conditions of their exchange. In other words, modes of acknowledgement can take place that are not fully determined in advance by structural conditions, such as ongoing colonization. An appeal can be made that seeks to bring the other into a relation of equality that in turn can begin to instantiate those forms of equality that must become the political basis for any legitimate form of cohabitation. In Said's formulation, you are here, we are here. There's a practice of linguistic solicitation of something new. No one is being asked to leave, only to live together in a way that does not refuse that already existing fact of being bound to one another irrevocably. As a form of direct address, it seeks to open up a dialogue form. The formulation does not install or prize dialogue as the substance and ultimate aim of politics. Don't go away thinking Butler believes that. It doesn't mean that those who were forced into exile are not also here or there in a way that needs to be substantially redressed. That's made very, very explicit in Darwish's poetry. Rather, it accepts the linguistic and political condition of a demographic proximity, a border that divides and joins, while rejecting the principle of demographic majority. Sorry, but that just has to go. It doesn't belong to a democratic tradition. And the historical and contemporary practices of dispossession and bombardment. On the one hand, a radical structural change is necessary, a constitutional basis for a state, a right of return reconciled with the law of return, the end of settler colonialism, which includes the occupation and continuing land appropriations. It includes as well the barricade of Gaza and the resolution of the rights of Palestinians from their damaged state. All that is necessary for any kind of cohabitation and for a just form of binationalism. On the other hand, that change, those changes in the plural, those many changes, happen sometimes through the smaller acts that build forms of solidarity that keep cooperation from being an instrument to ratify the status quo. So can we think and practice a binationalism that moves in at least two directions at once, allowing the binational to become, as it were, redefined within a shifting set of frames? How to distinguish among those small acts that devastate the colonial structure and those that ratify its reproduction and augmentation, that task remains. How to produce forms of solidarity that have as their aim the resistance to settler colonialism, through forms of solidarity, the ones that are contained in those modes of resistance, to begin to articulate forms of cohabitation that would start to realize a legitimate binationalism. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Judith, for the amazing job and all the wonderful work over the years. This is a question about, you began with the, should I go there? Yeah, this is it. Thank you. This is a question, you began with the poignant quotation from Said, and has to do with generalizability without exemplarity, without exceptionalism, non-hegemonic way of being, things being generalizable. So in that context, you also got into the politics of naming. When is a home a name? Is a home a non-name? Does the political hijack the ontological at some point? So the Zionism, is the home the desirable way to find a resolution? And if it is a home, is the home political, non-political? So I'm wondering if you could talk, so the question you also raised was the distinction between coexistence as non-denominational versus coexistence as. The moment you say as, something follows the as. Coexistence as women, as Arab, as Jew. So at the same moment, what comes after the as seems to take away the openness of the earlier notion of coexistence. So in Saeed's case, I'm thinking if you could comment on the way he, on the one hand, was in love with the exilic, but at the same time combining the exilic with the teleology of a nation-centered solution. And that's one. The other question is in Saeed's work, how to build in to the contrapuntal both recognition and antagonism. And in the process, re-territorialize recognition itself as another kind of interface, not the apparatus of domination, as in Fanon, the Negro is not any more than a white man. And that has to be destroyed, but perspectively, because it will not happen by itself. So if you could get into that combination in Saeed of the exilic, which could be ontological and ethical, but cannot be divorced from the other identification, which has to be political, and the kind of a dance between the two. So something along those lines, which has to do with coexistence as given. You cannot choose, as you said, to choose is to acquiesce in genocide. But the political realm insists on naming, coexistence as. You got to say as what. And the moment you name, the naming becomes almost a kind of an a priori act of othering. So something along those lines. The main thing is thank you so much.
Well, thank you. You're really one of my great best and most challenging leaders, and I'm really grateful for all your thinking on this and on other matters as well. And I know that you've worked really extensively on Saeed. Somebody I turned to really only in the last 5 years with greater focus. Let me say this. I don't think I agree that you have to coexist as something. I think that the practices of coexistence without quite knowing what the identitarian reference are. In other words, in the practice of coexistence, it would be odd to turn around and do a check on everybody's identity and where precisely you're from and how you identify it. Right? Would it matter if you come from Hebron or you come from Nazareth or you come from Haifa? Or would it matter if you're Mizrahi or if your parents were, one was Jordanian and the other one was Palestinian? And, everybody's got some story that, we've been hanging out for a very long time trying to kind of compile the relevant identitarian features of everybody's coexisting. So I don't think we have to coexist as. And in fact, I think maybe coexistence is a way of yes, bringing cultural specificity into the relation, but not necessarily in the category of identity. And I think that's what the as does, is that it refers us back to the subject, right? I am this subject beyond entering this relationship, and here I am in as this subject. So wait a minute, that's a subject-based personality. Who will actually from us to someone else? What's the living relation among nations? Now, what he does do is homogenize the term nation. Right? He assumes that there's one people represented by a nation. And, Hannah Arendt had to tell him a million times that's not the case. It's no longer the case. It was never the case. As long as you make the mistake of thinking that the nation state represents only one nationality, there will always be expulsion. So he does not do that. But he's not thinking carefully then and there about that. But for Saeed, I do think as well that the exilic have affinities, and maybe the term affinity is better there. The exilics have affinities among one another that not collapse their cultural specificity, but I guess I would use a kind of musical metaphor, perhaps, that there's a certain kind of vibration or a certain kind of syncretization that happens by virtue of that distinctness in relationship to one another. But it's not. But I do want to say that a second point, and this is just a brief rejoinder to a question that deserves a much longer and more serious one. What interests me about the last set of reflections that Clayton offers on diaspora is that he's actually saying, how can we bring ethical, political sensibility of diaspora back to Palestine, back to Israel-Palestine? What would it mean if diasporic principles were brought into the formulation of the state or governance for those people in that land? What difference would it make? And the first obvious difference it would make is you need a coherent and non-contradictory policy on refugees, and a coherent and non-contradictory way to link your policy on refugees to your understanding of citizenship, right? Because it cannot be that refugee status for one group gives them rights of citizenship, gives me rights of citizenship. I don't know, it would take me out, but that's okay. I can't even get the door right now. But I have rights of citizenship there, right? By virtue of the law of return from Palestinians who are living in Gaza or expelled in various parts of areas who are up there have no rights to return to their properties or to the areas where they might want to settle. So the law of return would have to be made, would have to be reconciled with the right of return. Because if you think that it is a wrong that people are dispossessed from their homes, and if you think it is a right that they are able to gain sanctuary, or even home, to acquire a home, and overcome statelessness and homelessness, then it seems to me that that great set of principles needs to be extended, and that in the securing of one's own home as a refugee, you cannot make another group homeless. You cannot produce a new refugee class without contradicting the very principle upon which you have legitimated your citizenship. That contradiction is at the base of this problem, right? So to take the diaspora, like, imagine the situation of the refugee. Imagine that there are affiliation among all refugees. What policy would we have? How would it be fair? How can we do it such that the rectification of one refugee problem does not produce a new refugee problem? Let's think together collaboratively. You know.
Well, I just got on folks who can see and not hear.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Thank you. Hi, I'm an adjunct teacher in the UCI Extension, and my question to you concerns the rising anti-Semitism that we see happening in universities around the country as a result of the Israeli-Palestine conflict. The UC campuses are no exception to this. Just recently, we've seen swastikas painted on a Jewish fraternity at Davis. We've seen efforts to keep Jewish students off of student government at UCLA. And here on this campus, on an almost annual basis, we have a speaker named Amir Abdel Malik Ali, who comes here and makes a series of anti-Semitic statements, anti-Jewish statements, basically calling this and that individual a straight-up Zionist Jew, which he spits out in the language of the old Nazis. Several years ago, there was an imam named Mohammed Al-Asi who said on this campus that you can take the Jew out of the ghetto, but you can't take the ghetto out of the Jew. So my question to you is...
My mother says that too.
Well, I think he didn't mean it as a joke.
How did he get that line? That's an old Jewish line.
Well, I don't think he meant it as a joke.
Okay,
Okay. Well, my question to you is that, you know, I know you support the pro-Palestinian cause, but doesn't this, incidents like this and this problem that we have on our campuses give you pause? And don't you think that incidents like this actually discredit the pro-Palestinian cause on campus? Thank you.
That's a fair question. Thank you for posing it. Thanks for posing it in a nice way. Look, I actually think that the much more serious threat of anti-Semitism right now is coming from Europe. I don't know if you follow also the Joliet Party, and Hungary, Poland both. The Rise of Golden Dawn in